getting back to during the war years, where we were kept in the camp there, we were on the Poltavska, school called Poltavska,
Okay.
in Mogilev. There was 2 women left in that whole school. One was the lady that you mentioned,
Ksenia.
She was a very nice lady. I was a young boy. I spoke German, Ukrainian, and she gave me a dog. Dog was a wonderful animal, Sergei.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to tell me when somebody would come, they were gonna skirmish around or maybe hurt people, she would call me right away and tell me. She would come over and tell my mother to get rid of me. In the back of where we were in a camp in Mogilev were the farms. And I would go into the corn stalks were so high you couldn't see anybody. So the dog and I would hide inside.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere about a year or two after, would be 1940, 43, the Germans came through and the dog was barking at one of them and he shot the dog because he was barking. Very painful.
So just to clarify, Ksenia was a teacher?
The
at
teacher,
school?
all I remember is her son, Vichku.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to them, I don't know, but she was a nice lady.
Mm-hmm.
Never hurt anybody. The Ukrainian people suffered tremendous in the Ukraine where we were because the people in charge, the army that was in charge, were Romanians. And one of the colonels was called Barbulescu. You can write it down. He would come on a white horse and with whips and whip these people that were called a tolchok, a little market where people would buy, maybe sell a dress and buy a piece of bread, whatever. I didn't see anybody. No Ukrainian person ever hurt anybody in the area where I was. I would have seen it.
And this is Mogilev, right?
Mogilev. I won't talk about Mogilev. As a matter of fact, my mother and I would go on a weekend, like on a Sunday. There was no weekend, but I called it the weekend. On a Sunday, they would take us out on the farms, and we would work because we were farmers. My mother was a farmer.
Right.
And we would dig up the old potatoes that were left in Europe. They used to bury the potatoes in the field, and we would dig up the potatoes, or the cows were fed shemishkes, the little black seeds, and they were covered with some kind of sweetness to get the cows to grow. So we worked for them, and they gave us bread, and they gave us food, even though my mother was a baker, but they were watching, not to take, people were watching the army.
Mm-hmm.
Army was watching, the German army was there.
So you worked for Ukrainian people?
Ukrainian people were there too, they didn't hurt anybody. We didn't get hurt, I can tell you right now. I didn't see anybody there in that area of hurting. As far as I was concerned, the Ukrainian people suffered just as much as we did.
So you met Stepan Bandera in Molodia? That's where you saw him?
Yeah, and in fact, after the war, there was no more, the followers were still there. I used to have a wagon with a horse, and I took my mother back there after the war. Like when we came back, I went into Molodia. People were afraid to go in there because they said Bandera yet to do. But we weren't afraid because we grew up. My mother grew up with them. I knew them.
Right.
And they didn't bother. And they may have bothered the Russians, but they didn't bother us.
They didn't bother the Jewish people?
Yeah. At least in that area where I was.
Right.
I'm not responsible for other areas that you hear.
Right.
One, my cousin's name was Josef Königsberg, who was in charge of the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And every time he had an argument with the colonel, in German a colonel is called Oberst. The Oberst would say to him, Joseph, you're going to get the last bullets from me. And he did get 2 bullets. He died in Israel. But he was in charge of the telephone. Can you imagine? I kept asking my mother, how did this brain in those days know anything about electronics? She was a genius in his own way. He worked the telephone wires for them. That was in Chernowitz. But at no time did I see Ukrainians. In fact, if I did see, I saw the Romanian officers hitting the Ukrainians with a whip when I told you they would be on the market Mondays and Thursdays, I think they were on the market always trying to sell whatever they had some goods. He would come in like a wild Indian or a wild Romanian. Anyway, that's what his name was Barbolescu, in case you want to know. He was a colonel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you were in the camp until
1944, March.
Until 1944. Okay. Do you remember maybe of any instances where somebody hid Jews in Mogilev or helped them hide?
Yes, all the time. They were holding them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say here's a Jew. Я не видел.
Right.
I didn't see it. I know that people lived with the Ukrainians outside the camp too, quietly. But there was in that area. As I repeat to you, only in that area. I don't know about other areas.